Welcome back to Coffeesodes, everybody. We are brewing up our 17th episode today.
Ooh, exciting.
It is. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into a topic that, honestly, you might not think is that interesting.
Okay.
But trust us on this one, because this is a big one. Land fragmentation and something called heirs property.
Yeah, so this is definitely...
You want to sip on the research that we sipped on? You can check out the episode description for all the links.
It is a really interesting topic, and it actually affects way more of us than you would think.
Yeah.
You know? Imagine waking up one day and, your commute is twice as long.
Oh, no.
Because all that farmland that used to be on your route is just gone, been swallowed up by development.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And it's not just about commutes, though, right?
Right, exactly.
What else is at stake here?
Well, think about it this way. So land fragmentation, which is essentially the breaking up of large tracts of land into smaller and smaller pieces, is happening globally. It's driven by a ton of factors, but a big one is definitely urbanization. So people moving to cities, and as those populations grow and cities sprawl outwards, it puts immense pressure on those rural agricultural lands.
So it's like a ripple effect, where the way we're changing our lifestyles in urban areas ends up impacting the landscape far beyond the city limits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here in the U.S., that ripple effect is predicted to hit us pretty hard.
Yeah.
The American Farmland Trust estimates that we'll lose 18 million acres of working land by 2040.
18 million.
Yeah, and just to put that into perspective, that's like losing an area larger than the entire state of West Virginia.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of land.
Poof.
So what does that mean for it? Are we all just going to have to pay way more for groceries or something?
That's certainly a possibility.
Right.
Less farmland means less food production, which can drive up prices. But it's not just about food, though.
Okay.
This land loss could impact our access to clean water, reduce biodiversity, and even contribute to climate change.
So this land fragmentation thing,
It's a big one.
it's a big problem.
Yeah.
And you mentioned heirs property.
Yeah.
What is that?
Exactly. So heirs property is a surprisingly common issue, particularly in the southern U.S., and it's land that's been inherited without a will, often passed down through generations within a family.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like a family heirloom.
Exactly.
Instead of like a piece of jewelry, it's a
piece of land.
piece of land.
But here's the catch. Without a clear will, ownership of that land gets divided among all the heirs, and things can get really messy, really fast.
Okay. Messy. How? What's the worst case scenario?
Okay, so imagine dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of relatives all technically owning a piece of the same property, but with no clear documentation or agreement on how to manage it or use it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can see how that would lead to some family drama, but does it actually impact the land itself?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
See, this lack of clear title makes the land incredibly vulnerable to fragmentation. So it becomes really difficult to get loans for improvements, make decisions about farming or forestry, or even sell the land if the family wanted to.
Oh, wow. So what happens then? Families just get stuck with this land they can't really use or sell?
Sometimes.
Oh, no.
Other times, they're forced to sell off pieces to developers, often below market value because they need the money, or they simply just can't manage the complexities of shared ownership with so many heirs.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
They're losing their family heritage, their financial security, all at once.
Exactly. And sadly, this problem really disproportionately affects African-American landowners in the South.
Right.
And the historical context here is really, really important.
Like the legacy of Jim Crow and all that.
Exactly.
How does that tie into heirs property?
Well, think about it. For generations, Black families were systematically denied access to legal resources, education, and financial services, including things like estate planning.
Wow.
So they were essentially set up to fail
Yeah.
when it came to land ownership, and the numbers reflect that, right?
Wow.
Black land ownership in the U.S. has plummeted by a staggering 90% since 1910. 90%.
Wow.
Heirs property is a major, major factor in that loss.
This is already a lot to process, and I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
Before we dive deeper, I want to ask, why should our listeners, who are sipping their coffee miles away from a farm, why should they care about this?
That's a great question.
What's the big picture impact?
It's a question of social justice, economic stability, and even national security.
Oh, wow.
Losing our working lands to fragmentation, it doesn't just impact rural communities, it affects us all.
Right.
Our food supply, our environment, even the very fabric of our rural heritage is at stake.
Okay, that really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
So what can be done to address this? Are there solutions out there, or are we just doomed to watch our land disappear?
There are definitely solutions out there,
Okay.
but they are complex and require a multi-pronged approach. We need to tackle this from a legal standpoint, a policy standpoint, and even a cultural standpoint.
Okay. So let's dive into all that after a quick break.
Sounds good. Let's start with the legal side of things. One of the most promising tools we have is the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act,
Okay.
UPHPA for short.
UPHPA.
It's been enacted in 23 states so far and provides some much-needed protections for heirs property owners.
So it's like a legal shield for families trying to hold on to their land.
That's a great way to put it. The UPHPA makes it a lot harder for developers or even other family members to force a sale of the land, which happens more often than you think.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It gives families more control over their property and a better chance of keeping it within the family.
23 states is a good start, but that still leaves a lot of families vulnerable, right?
Right.
What about the states that haven't adopted the UPHPA yet?
That's where policy and advocacy come in. Organizations like the American Farmland Trust are pushing for wider adoption of the UPHPA. And they're also working on other policy solutions to address land fragmentation as a whole.
I remember reading something in our research about community land trusts.
Yes.
How do those work, and could they be part of the solution here?
Community land trusts, CLTs, are a really fascinating model. They're essentially nonprofit organizations that acquire land and then lease it out to community members, often with affordability restrictions.
Right.
So instead of individuals owning the land outright, the CLT holds the title and ensures that the land remains affordable and accessible for generations to come.
That sounds like a really interesting way to prevent land from being gobbled up by developers or falling victim to the pressures of the market.
It is. And CLTs can be especially effective in urban areas where gentrification is pushing out longtime residents.
Right.
They can also be used to preserve farmland and create opportunities for young farmers who might not otherwise be able to afford to buy land.
So we've got legal protections like the UPHPA, and we've got innovative land ownership models like CLTs. What else is on the table?
Well, this might sound obvious, but education and outreach are crucial. A lot of landowners, especially those who've inherited property, simply aren't aware of the risks associated with heirs property, or the importance of things like succession planning.
Succession planning, that's basically having a plan for who will inherit the land and how it'll be managed in the future,
Yep,
right?
exactly. And it's something that a lot of families just avoid talking about because it can bring up difficult emotions, potential conflicts. But it's absolutely essential, especially for families with heirs property.
I imagine it can be a tough conversation to start, especially if you're dealing with multiple siblings or cousins who all have different ideas about what should happen to the land.
It can be. But
Yeah.
there are organizations out there that are helping families navigate these conversations and develop clear, legally sound succession plans.
Oh, that's great.
They're providing mediation services, legal guidance, educational workshops, really empowering landowners to make informed decisions about their land's future.
That's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of work being done on the policy and legal fronts, but what about the cultural side of things you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. You see, for many families, especially those who have been historically marginalized or dispossessed of their land ownership is about way more than just economics.
Okay.
It's about heritage, identity, a deep connection to their ancestors.
It's like that saying, land is not merely soil, it is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of souls.
Exactly. And for some, especially those whose families were forcibly removed from their land generations ago, reclaiming land ownership is a powerful act of healing and self-determination.
That makes me think about the history of Native American land ownership in this country.
Yes.
Didn't they face similar challenges with land fragmentation and forced displacement?
Absolutely. The Dawes Act of 1887, which aimed to assimilate Native Americans into white society, had the devastating effect of breaking up communally held tribal lands into individual allotments.
So it was like the government was trying to impose this Western concept of individual land ownership onto a culture that had a completely different relationship with the land.
Yes, and the results were catastrophic. Over 90 million acres of tribal land were lost through this process, much of it ending up in the hands of white settlers.
Wow, that's almost impossible to comprehend.
It is.
The scale of that land loss and the injustice of it all.
And the legacy of that injustice continues to affect Native American communities today.
Yeah.
Heirs property issues are rampant on reservations, making it difficult to develop the land or even build homes.
So it's almost like this double whammy where they were dispossessed of their land in the first place, and now they're struggling to maintain what little they have left.
Exactly. It's a heartbreaking situation, but there are glimmers of hope.
Okay.
Some tribes are using legal tools like the UPHPA to protect their land, and others are working to buy back ancestral lands that were lost.
It's inspiring to see that resilience and determination in the face of such overwhelming challenges.
It really is. And it reminds us that land isn't just an abstract concept or an economic asset.
Yeah.
It's a source of life, culture, and identity. It's something worth fighting for.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From legal frameworks to cultural connections. It's clear that this issue of land fragmentation is incredibly complex, and the solutions aren't always easy or straightforward.
Definitely not.
But what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that land fragmentation isn't just a rural problem. It's an issue that affects us all, whether we live in a city, a suburb, or a small town. The food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, all comes from the land.
And that land is under increasing pressure from development, climate change, a growing population. We need to be thinking about these issues and advocating for policies that protect our land and support sustainable land management practices. All right. Let's shift gears a bit. I know our research highlighted a few specific stories about families impacted by heirs property. I think hearing their experiences will help bring this issue to life for our listeners.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories that stand out to you?
One that really stuck with me was the story of the Jones family in North Carolina.
Okay.
They had inherited this beautiful piece of farmland that had been in their family for generations. But because they didn't have a clear will, ownership of the land got divided among dozens of heirs scattered across the country.
Oh, wow.
They couldn't agree on how to manage the land, and eventually a developer came in and offered to buy it from them. Some family members wanted to sell, others wanted to hold on to the land.
Yeah.
It created this huge rift within the family.
Oh, it's so sad. What happened in the end? Did they manage to keep the land?
Well, they ended up working with a legal aid organization that specializes in heirs property issues.
Okay.
The organization helped them navigate the complex legal issues, mediate family disputes, and ultimately they were able to come up with a plan to keep the land within the family.
Wow, that's a great example of how legal assistance and mediation can make a real difference. It gives me hope that even in the most challenging situations, there are ways to find solutions and preserve these family legacies.
It's really inspiring to see families like the Joneses fight so hard to hold on to their land. It reminds us that land ownership is about so much more than just money. It's about history, connection, and a sense of belonging.
Okay, we've talked about the challenges, the solutions, the personal stories. I think our listeners are probably wondering what they could do to help.
Definitely.
Are there any practical steps they can take to support land preservation efforts and address the issue of heirs property?
Absolutely. First and foremost, education is key. Learn about land fragmentation and heirs property issues in your own community. Find out what organizations are working on these issues and how you can get involved.
There are a ton of resources available online, and we've included some links in the episode description, so check those out if you want to dive deeper.
And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Share information on social media. Contact your elected officials and let them know that you care about land preservation and support policies that protect working lands and address heirs property.
You can also support organizations that are working on the ground to help families keep their land. I think it's time to connect with our listeners and hear what stood out to them from this conversation.
What resonated with you the most? What questions do you still have? Share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Coffeesodes.
We love hearing from you, and your insights help us shape future episodes and ensure that we're addressing the topics that matter most to you.
So keep those coffee cups full, stay curious, and join us next time for another deep dive into a topic that might surprise you.
Until then, thanks for listening.